The grand starship descended through Earth's atmosphere like a jewel falling through water, its hull shimmering with colors that had no names in any human language, and the people of Earth watched from every corner of the globe as the massive vessels settled into orbit above the United Nations. Headquarters in Geneva. Inside the ship, Grand Ambassador Kelthric of the Velrathi Communion prepared himself for what should have been a routine first contact, and he had done this 47 times before with 47 different species, and each time followed the same predictable pattern: shock at learning they were not alone, wonder at the vastness of galactic civilization, fear of the dangers that lurked in deep space, and finally, grateful acceptance of the Council's protection and guidance. Kelthric adjusted his ceremonial robes, each fold representing a different species he had successfully integrated into the Galactic Council, and his skin shifted through calming blue hues as he reviewed the preliminary data on humanity. And they were young, aggressive, barely past their atomic age, and perfectly positioned to become a productive client species under Velrathi sponsorship. Council chamber they constructed in Geneva was a masterwork of diplomatic architecture, and holographic projectors created the illusion of a vast amphitheater filled with representatives from 1,000 worlds, and Kelthric stood at the center, his form magnified so that every human delegate could see him clearly, and he began his speech with the traditional greeting that had been refined over 10,000 years of diplomatic contact. People of Earth, you stand at the threshold of a greater community. And his voice resonated through translators in every human language, and for millions of years, civilized species have gathered under the banner of the Galactic Council, sharing knowledge, ensuring peace, and protecting one another from the dangers that exist between the stars. And today, we extend our hand to you and join us, and together we will guide your species to heights you cannot yet imagine. The human delegates sat quietly, and they listened as Kelthric explained the benefits of council membership: access to technologies that would cure their diseases, solve their energy problems, and allow them to spread across the stars under proper guidance. And he outlined the protection the Council would provide against hostile species, and the Krell Dominion alone had consumed 17 unprotected civilizations. In the last century, he painted a picture of humanity's future: their scientists learning in council academies, their warriors training alongside galactic peacekeepers, their artists sharing their unique perspective with billions of beings, and all they had to do was accept council authority, allow council bases on their worlds, agree to develop their technology according to approved frameworks. When Kelthric finished, he stood in satisfied silence and waiting for the expected response, and usually there were tears, sometimes applause. Occasionally, someone would faint from the overwhelming emotion of the moment. Secretary General Maria Santos stood to respond, and she was a small woman with silver hair and eyes that had seen too many Earth wars, and she smiled politely at Kelthric and thanked him for traveling so far and for his generous offer. However, she said, and that single word made Kelthric's skin flicker orange with confusion: humanity must respectfully decline. The translator in Kelthric's ear made a small crackling sound, and he touched it reflexively, and assuming it had malfunctioned, because surely she had not said what he thought she said. I apologize, Secretary General. There seems to be an issue with translation, and his skin shifted to concerned purple. And could you please repeat your response? Of course, and Santos's smile never wavered, and we said no. Thank you, the chamber erupted in whispers, and human delegates leaned toward one another and speaking in rapid bursts, while holographic council representatives flickered with surprise, and Kelthric's skin cycled through 6 different colors in as many seconds, settling finally on a pale yellow of complete bewilderment. Perhaps I did not explain clearly, and he said slowly, yes, as one might speak to a child. This is an invitation to join the greatest civilization the galaxy has ever known, and you would refuse this. We understand the offer perfectly. Ambassador and another delegate stood, and this time it was Minister Chen from the Asian Coalition. And Earth has discussed this at length, and our answer is unified. We appreciate your visit. We acknowledge that you mean well, but we choose to continue our development independently. Kelthrick felt his diplomatic training crumbling, and in 47 first contacts, across 200 years of service, he had never encountered this, and species begged to join the Council, and they pleaded for protection and guidance, and they certainly did not refuse with such casual certainty. You do not understand the dangers, and his voice rose slightly, and decades of composure slipping, and the galaxy is not safe for unaligned species, and the Krell will find you, and when they do, you will have no defense then. We will deal with that when it happens, and Santos said simply, an ambassador. Humanity has spent its entire history fighting for the right to determine its own path, and we have been invaded, conquered, liberated, and rebuilt more times than we can count, and every time someone offered to protect us in exchange for our freedom, the cost was too high. This is not about conquest, and Kelthrick protested, and the Council does not seek to control you. Perhaps not intentionally, and Minister Chen replied. But your own words reveal the truth, and you speak of approved technologies, proper guidance, Council authority, and these are gentle words for the same old story. Surrender your independence, and we will keep you safe, the Russian delegate. Ambassador Volkov stood next, and his voice was rough but clear, and my grandfather lived under a regime that promised protection and prosperity in exchange for obedience, and he told me stories before he died, and stories about how security always costs freedom, and how organizations that claim to have your best interests at heart are often the ones you should trust the least. Kelthrick's skin turned deep red, and not with anger, but with something closer to distress. And you are making a mistake that could cost your species everything. Maybe, and Santos acknowledged, but it will be our mistake to make an ambassador. I do not doubt your sincerity, and I do not question that many council species are happy with their choice, but humanity needs to walk this path ourselves, and we need to discover who we are without someone else defining it for us. What about technology in Kelthrick? Tried a different approach, and we can cure diseases that ravage your population. Solve your energy crisis, clean your polluted world, and we appreciate that, and Santos said. But we would prefer to solve these problems ourselves, and the struggle to overcome our challenges is part of what makes us human. And if you simply give us the answers, we learn nothing. The discussion continued for 3 more hours, and Kelthrick deployed every argument, every incentive, every warning in the Council's diplomatic arsenal, and he explained the prestige humanity would gain, and the opportunities for trade, and the cultural exchange that would enrich both sides to every point. The humans listened politely and refused gently as the meeting concluded. Santos approached Kelthrick privately, an ambassador. Please do not take this as an insult, and your offer was generous, and your intentions seemed good, but humanity has fought. It's too hard for independence to surrender it now. Even to benevolent masters, we would not be your masters. And Kelthrick said wearily, perhaps not today, and she replied, but in 100 years. Who can say? In every relationship based on protection and guidance eventually becomes one of dependence and control, and we have seen this pattern too many times in our own history. Kelthrick returned to his ship that night, his skin a dull gray of defeat, and he sent his report to the Council with trembling hands and describing humanity as irrationally independent and suffering from collective paranoia regarding authority structures. He recommended a waiting period, and humanity would encounter the harsh realities of galactic life soon enough, and then they would come begging for Council protection, and they always did as his ship departed Earth's orbit. Kelthrick looked back at the blue-green world and wondering if perhaps he had missed something important in his analysis on Earth. Secretary General Santos stood at her office window and watching the alien ship disappear into the stars, and beside her, Minister Chen asked the question on everyone's mind. Did we just make the biggest mistake in human history? Santos smiled, and maybe, or maybe, we just avoided repeating the oldest one. 10 years had passed since humanity rejected the Council's invitation, and Ambassador Kelthrick had been correct about one thing. The galaxy was watching Earth very carefully now, and at the Council's Intelligence Division headquarters on the neutral station of Concordia, Analyst Vrin of the Story Collective reviewed the latest surveillance data with growing unease, and her species had evolved to detect patterns in her compound eyes. Could process visual information across 17 different spectrums simultaneously and right now. Every spectrum was showing her something that made her nervous. The humans had done something unprecedented. They not simply continued their development as expected, and they had accelerated it in ways that violated several fundamental principles of technological evolution, and species were supposed to advance gradually, building on council-approved frameworks that had been tested over millennia, and humanity was doing none of that. Rin pulled up a holographic display showing human technological progress, and the graph should have been a gentle upward slope, and instead it looked like a cliff face. "This is not possible," and she muttered, her mandibles clicking in agitation. Her supervisor, a massive Grelnith named Thorum, lumbered over to examine the data, and his species moved slowly, but thought even slower, which made him perfect for careful analysis in what is not possible. Vrin everything about humanity, and she gestured at the cascading data, and look at their FTL development, and we gave them nothing, showed them nothing. And yet they achieved faster than light travel in 8 years. 8 years in Thorum's voice was a deep rumble, and the Velrothi took 300, and they had council guidance exactly. And Vrin pulled up another display, and look at how they did it. And their theoretical framework is completely different from standard dimensional folding, and they are using something they call quantum tunneling, paired with artificial gravity manipulation, and our physicists say it should not work. And yet it does work, and yet it does work. And Vrin confirmed, and human ships are now exploring their neighboring star systems, and they have established colonies on 4 different worlds without any council oversight or safety protocols. Thorum leaned closer to the display, and his small eyes struggling to make sense of the numbers and how many casualties from their colonial efforts. Vrin checked the data, and fewer than expected, and much fewer, and they lose approximately 1% of their colonists to accidents or environmental factors, and the council average for first-generation colonies is 7%. So they are somehow better at this than species with 10,000 years of experience, it appears. So Thorum sat back, his massive form settling into the reinforced chair, and what else? Vrin pulled up a new set of files, and this was where things became truly disturbing, and they have militarized their entire star system, and Earth has a defensive fleet of 200 warships, and Mars has another 100, and Jupiter's moons host shipyards that produce 3 new vessels per month. That is aggressive, and Thorum admitted, but not unprecedented. And the Krell maintains similar numbers, yes, but the Krell have been spacefaring for 1,500 years. And Vrin's mandibles clicked rapidly now, and humanity has been in space for barely a century, and they have gone from chemical rockets to a fleet that our tactical analysts admit they cannot fully evaluate because the humans refuse to share their specifications. She pulled up visual recordings of human warships, and the vessels were angular and brutal in their design and lacking the elegant curves of council ships, and they bristled with weapons arrays and sensor clusters and things the analysts could not identify. "What are those?" and Thorum pointed at strange protrusions on a ship's hull. "We do not know," and Vrin said flatly, "and we have identified what we think are railguns, missile batteries, and some form of directed energy weapon. But these other systems are unknown, and when we asked the humans about them, they sent us a polite message, thanking us for our interest and declining to provide technical specifications." Declined? They decline everything. And Vrin said with frustration bleeding into her voice, and every communication attempt is met with courtesy and absolute refusal to engage, and we offer them trade. They say no thank you, and we offer cultural exchange. They say maybe later, and we offer to share our sensor technology so they can better detect spatial anomalies. They say they have already developed their own Thorum process this slowly, and so they want nothing from us. Nothing at all. And Vrin confirmed and end. And that terrifies me, because species need things, and species want help, and species seek validation from the greater galactic community, and humanity just exists in its own bubble, doing its own thing, and apparently doing it very well. She pulled up another file, and this one marked with high priority tags, and there is more, and 3 months ago. Humans made contact with the Zephyrini independence movement. Thorum's eyes widened slightly, and which for a Grelnath meant genuine surprise in Zephyrini, who rejected council membership 20 years ago. The same, and Vryn said, and according to our sources, humanity has established diplomatic relations with them, and possibly trade relations as well, and we believe humans are sharing their technological developments with the Zephyrini.
Oh.
That violates the technology sharing accords only if you are a council member, and Vryn pointed out, and humanity never signed those accords and they never agreed to any council regulations, and technically, they are free to share whatever they want with whomever they want. Thorum rumbled deep in his chest in a sound that usually preceded very bad news. And how many other independent species have the humans contacted? Vryn's mandibles went still. And at least 15 that we know of, and maybe more. The silence in the room was heavy, and Thorum stared at the data displays. In his slow mind working through the implications, and when he finally spoke, his voice was even deeper than usual in Vryn. Are the humans building an alliance network outside council authority? I believe so. And she said quietly, and if I am right, this changes everything. She pulled up a star chart showing human activity over the past decade, and blue markers indicated human ships. Green markers showed human colonies, and red markers showed contact with independent species, and the pattern was clear even too. Thorum's methodical thinking humanity was not just exploring, and they were establishing relationships, building infrastructure, and creating their own network of allies and trade, partners and all, without asking permission or following established protocols. We need to report this to the council, and Thorum said, I already have. And Vryn replied, and they are calling an emergency session, but not about this, then what? Vryn pulled up the most recent file, and the one that had arrived just 3 hours ago, and Krell Dominion has detected human expansion toward the frontier rim. And you know what the Krell think? About unaligned species in their territory, they destroy them usually, yes, and Vryn said. And this time, they did something different, and they sent humanity a message. What kind of message? A warning, and Vryn displayed the intercepted communication, and they told humanity to withdraw from 3 star systems claimed by the Krell Dominion and return to their home system until they were ready to accept proper galactic authority. In humanity's response, Vryn played the audio file, and a human voice spoke in clear, unaccented galactic standard, and we acknowledge your claim to these systems, and we respectfully disagree with it, and we will continue our operations. And if you attempt to remove us by force, we will defend ourselves, and we hope this situation can be resolved peacefully, but we are prepared for any outcome. Thorum's rumble became almost a growl, and humans just told the Krell to back off. Yes, Krell who have destroyed 17 civilizations. Yes, the Krell who even the council avoids direct confrontation with. Yes. Thorum stood in his massive form towering over Vryn. And when did the humans send this message? 2 days ago. In the Krell response, Vryn's mandibles clicked in what might have been the Sistari equivalent of a nervous laugh, and they are sending a fleet and 20 warships, arriving at the disputed systems in approximately 48 hours to do what? To quote the Krell War Master directly, to teach these upstart primitives their place in the galactic order. Thorum moved toward the door, and faster than Vryn had. You ever seen him move, and we need to warn the humans we already tried? And Vryn called after him, and thanked us for the information, and said they had already detected the Krell fleet and were prepared. Thorum stopped and turned slowly, and prepared how they did not say, and Vryn looked back at her displays and at the cascade of data about human capabilities and human defenses and human unknowns, but considering everything else they have accomplished, I am very curious to find out. She pulled up a live feed of the disputed system and the one where the Krell fleet would arrive in 2 days, and 3 human ships orbited there, small and angular and bristling with unknown weapons, 20 Krell warships, against 3 human vessels, and by every metric the Council had. By every tactical analysis and historical precedent, the humans should be preparing to evacuate. War Master Krellthor of the Dominion stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Crimson Fang, and watched the view screen with satisfaction, and before him hung the human colony of New Perth. a pathetic cluster of habitation domes on a barely terraformed rock, and 20 Krell warships surrounded it like predators, circling wounded prey. This would be quick open a channel to the human settlement. And Krelther commanded, and his voice was a deep growl that made junior officers flinch. And let us offer them the courtesy of surrender before we demonstrate the futility of resistance, the communications officer, a young Krell, eager to prove himself in battle, worked his console and channel open. War Master Krelther straightened, his dark scales gleaming under the bridge lights, and he had done this dozens of times before, and unaligned. Species always responded the same way. First defiance, then fear, finally desperate pleading, and the Dominion would accept their surrender, lake what resources they needed, and leave the survivors as a warning to others, humans of New Perth. And his voice boomed across the channel, and I am War Master Krelther of the Dominion Fleet, and you have trespassed into territory claimed by the Krell for 300 years, and you were warned to withdraw, and you refused. And now you will face the consequences of your arrogance. He paused, letting the threat sink in, and imagining the panic spreading through those fragile domes. However, the Dominion is not without mercy, and he continued, and surrender your colony. Provide us with your technological data, and accept Krell authority over your expansion efforts, and if you do this within the next hour, we will allow your civilians to evacuate unharmed. The response came immediately, and no delay for consultation or debate, and a human voice spoke in clear galactic standard and calm and almost friendly. War Master Krelther, this is Commander Sarah Mitchell of the Earth Defense Forces, and we appreciate you traveling all this way, but we are going to have to decline your offer. And New Perth is a legally established human colony in unclaimed space, and we have no intention of surrendering or withdrawing. Krelthar's eyes narrowed, and the audacity was almost refreshing. Commander Mitchell, perhaps you do not understand your situation, and he gestured, and his tactical officer displayed the force comparison on the main screen, and you have 3 ships, and we have 20, and you are outnumbered, gunned and surrounded. And surrender is your only rational option? We understand the numbers. War Master and Mitchell replied, and we respectfully disagree about our options, and please withdraw your fleet from this system within the next 30 minutes, or we will be forced to defend our colony. The bridge fell silent, and junior officers looked at each other in disbelief, and a human was threatening them, and the humans, who had barely been in space for a century, were threatening the Krell. Dominion Krell threw back his head and laughed, and it was a deep, booming sound that echoed through the bridge. And you will defend your colony, and you and your 3 little ships. And Commander Mitchell, I admire your courage, but courage without wisdom is merely stupidity. 30 minutes, War Master and Mitchell said, and we will not ask again. The channel, close to Krelther's laughter died, and how entertaining. In helm, bring us within weapons range of the nearest human vessel and weapons. Prepare to disable their engines, and we will demonstrate the price of defiance before we take the colony. The Crimson Fang advanced in its 19 companion ships, moving into attack formation, and this was standard procedure, a show of overwhelming force followed by a quick, brutal demonstration, and then surrendered. Nearest human ship was small and angular and ugly by Krell standards, and it was called the EDFS. Resolute according to their scans, and it held position as the Krell fleet approached, and not even powering up defensive shields. They are not even defending themselves, the tactical officer reported with confusion. Perhaps they have accepted the inevitable, and Krelther said, and lock weapons on their engine section, and fire when ready. Weapons locked, and the tactical officer confirmed, and firing in 3, 2, 1. The Resolute disappeared. Not destroyed, and disappeared. In one moment it was there on their sensors, and the next it was simply gone, and no explosion. No debris field, no energy signature. Where did it go? And Krelther demanded, unknown. War Master and the tactical officer's claws flew over his console, and it just vanished from our sensors, and all of them alarms shrieked across the bridge contact, and the sensor officer shouted, and behind us, 3,000 meters, the view screen switched to rear view, and the Resolute hung there, and exactly where it should not be, and behind the Krell formation, where their defensive screens were weakest. How did they and Krelther began the Resolute fired, but not with energy weapons, or missiles like any civilized species would use, and something invisible rippled from the human ship in space. Itself seemed to twist and distort, and the ripple hit the Krell destroyer. Vengeance, and the ship's hull crumpled inward like paper. Being crushed by an invisible hand metal, screamed an atmosphere vented into space, and the Vengeance broke apart in seconds, and its crew dead before they could even scream all ships. Return fire, and Krelther roared and destroyed that vessel. 20 ships opened fire in energy beams and kinetic projectiles, filling space with deadly light, and every shot missed, and the Resolute was moving, but not like any ship Krelther had. You ever seen and it was not accelerating and it was teleporting and appearing here? Then there, then somewhere else entirely, and each time it appeared, another ship died, the destroyer relentless, cut in half by something that looked like a beam of pure darkness. Cruiser Bloodletter simply ceased to exist when a strange projectile passed through it, and leaving nothing but a debris field of atoms, the frigate Nightfall, torn apart when its own fusion core somehow detonated despite 3 layers of failsafes. They are inside our formation, and the tactical officer reported, and his voice rising toward panic, and we cannot get a lock, and they are moving faster than our targeting systems can track. Where are the other 2 human ships? And Krelthar demanded, still at the colony. War Master and the sensor officer said, and they have not moved. They did not need to move. And Krelthar realized with cold horror, and one ship was doing this, and one single human vessel was destroying the pride of the Krell, Dominion all ships. Full power to shields, and he commanded, and regroup at rally point 7, and we need to. The bridge lights flickered alarms, screamed even louder, and the kind of alarms that should never sound because they meant something was very, very wrong, War Master. And the engineering officer's voice came through the cum in terror, clear in every word, and something has breached our hull, and something is inside the ship. What kind of something I do not know, and the engineer screamed, and then the line went dead on the view screen. Krelther watched as the Resolute appeared directly in front of the Crimson Fang, and impossibly close, and close enough that he could see details on its hula. Port opened on the human ship's side, something shot out and faster than the eye could follow, and it hit the Crimson Fang's hull and passed through their shields as if they were not there, and buried itself deep in the ship's structure. What was that? And Krelther shouted, unknown projectile, and tactical reported, and it has penetrated. 2 Deck 9. Section 12 in War Master. That is near the main reactor. Krelther's blood ran cold, and evacuate that section, and seal the projectile exploded. But not with fire or force, and with something else, and something that ate through matter, and the ship's structure began collapsing in on itself, and pulled toward the projectile like water down a drain, and bulkheads twisted, and corridors warped, and crew members were pulled screaming toward the growing void in the heart of the ship. Abandon. Ship and Krelther roared in all hands. Abandon the Crimson Fang flagship of the Krell Dominion's 7th Fleet. Folded in on itself like a dying star, and its hull imploding toward the artificial singularity. The humans had planted in its core, and Krelthor had just enough time to realize that humanity had weaponized gravity itself before everything went black. Commander Sarah? Mitchell watched from the bridge of the Resolute as the last Krell ship flickered out of existence, and attempting a desperate FTL jump with damaged engines, and it would probably make it home. She thought, and that was intentional, and someone needed to tell the Krell what happened here. Casualty report, and she asked her tactical officers. 0 casualties. Commander and Lieutenant Park reported, and the colony was never threatened, and the Krell never got within weapons range of the civilian domes, and the Krell losses 19 ships destroyed. 1 heavily damaged and retreating, and Park said quietly an estimated Krell casualties, approximately 42,000. Mitchell felt the weight of those numbers, and she was a soldier, and she understood the necessity of what they had done. But 42,000 lives was not a small thing. They were warned, and her XO, Commander James O'Brien, said quietly, and 3 times we asked them to withdraw. I know, and Mitchell said, but I doubt that will make anyone feel better about what happened here. She looked at the debris field that had been a Krell fleet, and at the colony, still peaceful and intact behind them, and at the two other human ships that had not needed to fire a single shot. This was going to change everything. The council chamber on Concordia Station had never been this full, and representatives from 300 species crowded into the massive amphitheater and more, attending via holographic projection, and even species that rarely involved themselves. In council affairs had sent observers. Grand Ambassador Kelthrick stood at his designated position, and his skin cycling through colors so rapidly it was almost strobe-like. And he had called this emergency session, but now that everyone was here, he almost regretted it. The silence was oppressive finally. High Chancellor Morgan of the Heptari ascended to the central platform in his crystalline body, refracting the chamber's light into rainbow patterns, and the Heptari had led the council for 3,000 years, and they were known for calm, measured responses to any crisis. Morgan was not calm now. We have all seen the footage. His voice resonated through the chamber like struck crystal, and 19 Krell warships destroyed and one fleeing in terror. And 42,000 Krell dead, and all accomplished by 3 human vessels in approximately 17 minutes. A murmur ran through the assembly. The Krell Dominion has issued a formal complaint to this council, and Morgan continued, and they claim humanity used illegal weapons, violated the Warfare Convention, committed acts of unprovoked aggression, unprovoked, and a voice called out, and it was Representative Zalthus of the Aquila Confederation, and her feathers ruffling with indignation, and the Krell sent 20 warships to forcibly remove a legal human colony, and humanity warned them 3 times to withdraw. The humans claimed that space was unclaimed. And another voice countered, and this from a Krell representative who had somehow managed to attend despite the political situation, but the Dominion has held that territory for 3 centuries. Held how? And Zalthus shot back, and by occasionally passing through it, and by claiming everything within 100 light years as theirs and the frontier. Rim has never been formally recognized as Krell territory by this council. The chamber erupted in argument, and decades of tension between pro-Krell and anti-Krell, factions boiling over, and Morgan let it continue for precisely 30 seconds before he amplified his voice to ear-splitting levels. Silence the arguing, stop. The specifics of territorial claims are irrelevant to the primary issue. And Morgan said coldly, and which is this: humanity has demonstrated military capabilities that exceed our worst projections, and they refuse all diplomatic contact, and they are sharing their technology with other non-aligned species, and they represent an unknown threat to galactic stability, or an unknown opportunity and a small voice. Said every head turned. The speaker was Counselor Alira of the Sistori Collective, and a junior member who rarely spoke in full council sessions, and her compound eyes swept the chamber nervously, but she held her ground. Explain. And Morgan commanded humanity defeated the Krell, and Illyra said, and her voice growing stronger, and Krell, who we have feared for generations, and the Krell who have consumed 17 civilizations, and the Krell who even this council avoids confronting directly. And if humanity can do this, perhaps they could help us deal with other threats we have been unable to address. You suggest we recruit them as weapons. And Morgan said flatly, I suggest we talk to them as equals. And Illyra replied, and something we failed to do the first time. Kelthrick felt his skin flush orange, and the council offered humanity full membership with all associated benefits, and they refused. No, and Illyra turned to face him, and her mandibles clicking rapidly, and the council offered humanity protection and guidance in exchange for accepting our authority and our technologies and our way of doing things, and we never asked what they wanted, and we told them what they needed. That is standard first contact procedure, and Kelthrick protested perhaps. That is the problem. And Illyra said quietly. The chamber fell silent again, and this time the silence felt different and heavier with the weight of uncomfortable realization. Representative Thorm stood, in his massive Grelnath form, drawing attention. And I have reviewed the intelligence data extensively, and humanity has made contact with 15 other non-aligned species and possibly more, and they are building relationships based on voluntary cooperation and technology sharing and mutual defense agreements that violates the technology sharing accords. and a voice called out only for council members, and Thorum rumbled, and humanity never signed those accords illegally. They can do whatever they wish, and here is what concerns me. The species they are contacting are not random, and they are specifically reaching out to species who previously rejected council membership or who expressed dissatisfaction with their current status. The implications rippled through the chamber like a shockwave. They are building an alternative alliance. And Morgan said, in his crystalline body darkening in an alliance outside council authority, "It appears so." Thorum confirmed how many species have responded to human overtures. At least 8 have established formal diplomatic relations with Earth, and Thorum said, and a set of 23 have opened preliminary communications, and Chancellor. We believe this number will increase significantly after the Krell. It's an incident because humanity has proven they can protect their allies. Someone muttered exactly, and Thorum said. Morgan stood silent for a long moment in his crystalline structure, refracting light into increasingly dark colors, and when he spoke, his voice was cold enough to freeze atmosphere's options. The chamber erupted again, and this time not with argument, but with suggestions, and each more desperate than the last. We could impose sanctions. On what? And they do not trade with us. Military intervention? Did you not see what they did to the Krell? We could offer them better terms for membership. They do not want membership. We could cut them off from galactic civilization. They are already cut off, and by choice we could declare them a rogue state and authorize council forces to what? And attack them? And 3 ships destroyed. Krell fleet, and how many ships do you think it would take to defeat humanity on their home territory? The arguments grew more heated and more frantic, and Kelthric watched with growing horror as the most powerful organization in the galaxy descended into chaos over a single species that simply wanted to be left alone. Nuffin Morgan's voice cut through the noise like a blade. And we are the Galactic Council, and we have maintained peace and order for 10,000 years, and we will not be brought to chaos by one upstart species. Then what do you propose? Chancellor and Kelthric, Asked Morgan turned his dark, crystalline gaze on the Grand Ambassador. And you made first contact with humanity, and you have more experience with them than anyone here. And what do you suggest? Kelthric's skin went pale gray and the color of defeat, and honestly, Chancellor and I do not know, and every tactic I employed failed, and every argument I made was rejected, and humanity operates according to principles. I do not fully understand. They operate according to independence, and Alira said quietly, and they value freedom over security, and self-determination over guidance, and the choice to make their own mistakes over the certainty of following someone else's proven path. Those are primitive values, and a Velrathi representative scoffed. Are they? And Alira turned to face the speaker. And or are they values we have forgotten after 10,000 years of collective decision-making? And maybe humanity is not primitive, and maybe they are just different. Different is dangerous. And the Velrathi said different is inevitable, and Alira countered, and the galaxy is vast, and sooner or later we were going to encounter a species that did not fit our models, and humanity is that a species, and we can either learn to coexist with them, or we can try to force them into our system. And after what we just saw, I know which option seems wiser. Morgan considered this, and his crystalline structure slowly lightening from dark purple back toward neutral blue. The Sistari makes a valid point, and he said finally, and however, we cannot simply ignore the situation, and humanity is expanding and growing stronger and building alliances, and if we do nothing, we may wake up one day to find ourselves irrelevant. Perhaps we already are. And Thorum said quietly, and at least to humanity, the words hung in the air like a death sentence. Kelthric felt something crack inside him in decades of diplomatic certainty crumbling, and he had always believed that the council was necessary, and that galactic civilization required centralized authority, and that species needed guidance to thrive, but humanity was thriving without them, more than thriving, and they were innovating faster than species with millennia of experience, and they were defending themselves against threats the council avoided. And they were building relationships based on mutual respect rather than hierarchical authority. What if everything he believed was wrong? I propose a compromise. And a new voice spoke, and it was Counselor Ven of the Meridian Assembly, and an old species known for wisdom and patience, and we cannot force humanity to join us, and we have learned that lesson. But we can extend an olive branch, they will reject it. And Kelthric said wearily, perhaps, and Ven acknowledged, but perhaps not. And let us not offer them membership or protection or guidance, and let us simply offer them dialogue and no strings attached. No expectations, no demands, and just an opportunity to talk as equals and to understand each other better. 3 months after the Council's emergency session, humanity broadcast a message that would change the galaxy forever. It's not sent to the Council, and it was sent to everyone, every species with a radio telescope and every civilization capable of receiving interstellar transmissions, and every colony and outpost and station and ship throughout known space, and the humans used an old Earth technique. They broadcast on all frequencies, simultaneously, and making it impossible to miss or ignore. Secretary General Maria Santos appeared on screens across 300 worlds, and her image clear, and her voice calm, and her message, simple people of the galaxy. And she began, and humanity has been aware of your existence for 13 years, and in that time, we have watched you and learned from you and tried to understand the civilization you have built, and we have been invited to join your Galactic Council, and we declined, and many of you found this confusing or even offensive. She paused, and letting that sink in, we understand your concerns, and we understand that our independence makes you nervous. We understand that you fear what you do not control, but we want you to understand something about humanity. We are not your enemies, and we do not seek to destroy the Council or disrupt galactic civilization, and we simply choose to walk our own path behind her. A holographic display showed Earth spinning slowly, blue and green and beautiful for all of human history. We have struggled with a question: how do we balance freedom with security? How do we maintain our independence while still cooperating with others? And how do we grow strong without becoming tyrants or weak without becoming victims? We do not claim to have answered these questions perfectly, and Santos continued. But we have learned some things, and we have learned that systems built on hierarchy and authority eventually become rigid and resistant to change, and we have learned that protection offered by the powerful often comes with chains attached. We have learned that the hardest path is sometimes the right path, and even when easier options exist, the display behind her changed and showing human colonies scattered across a dozen stars. The Galactic Council operates on a principle that has served you well for 10,000 years: collective authority, centralized decision-making, proved development within established frameworks, and we do not judge you for this. And for 10,000 years, you have maintained peace and prosperity for billions of beings, and that is no small achievement, but it is not our way. The display changed again, and this time showing various species: Zephrony, Aquila Meridian, and others, and species, who had reached out to humanity and who had established diplomatic relations outside. Council oversight. Humanity believes in voluntary cooperation, and we believe in building relationships based on mutual respect rather than hierarchical authority, and we believe that every species has the right to develop according to their own values and their own pace and their own vision of what they want to become. This is why we declined Council membership. And Santos said, and not because we reject you, but because we reject the idea that there is only one right way to organize galactic civilization. The screen behind her went dark. We know many of you fear us. And her voice was quieter now and more personal, and the Krell learned that we can defend ourselves, and the Council learned that we will not be intimidated into compliance. And some of you believe we are building an empire to rival the Council. You are wrong. Santos leaned forward slightly, and her eyes intense. We are not building an empire, and empires require subjects, and we want allies and not servants, and we are not forming a competing council. Because councils require authority, and we prefer partnership, and we are not trying to replace your system, and we are simply offering an alternative for those who want one. Any species that wishes to remain in the council has our full support, she continued, and any species that wishes to leave the council and stand alone has our friendship, and any species that wishes to join with us in voluntary cooperation has our welcome, and the choice is yours, and it will always be yours. The display reappeared, and this time showing coordinates and frequencies and contact information. These are the coordinates to establish diplomatic contact with Earth, and Santos said, and these are the frequencies we monitor, and these are the protocols we use. And any species can contact us at any time, and there are no applications to fill out. No membership fees, no binding agreements or mandatory obligations. Talk to us or do not talk to us. And her smile was slight but genuine, and trade with us or do not trade with us, and form alliances with us, or maintain your independence. And we will respect any choice you make because we believe that respect for autonomy is the foundation of genuine cooperation. She stood, and the camera pulling back to show her full figure against the backdrop of Earth. The galaxy is vast enough for multiple approaches to civilization, and Santos said, and the Council has its way, and we have ours, and there is room for both, and there is room for 1,000 other ways we have not yet imagined, and diversity is not a threat to stability, and it is the source of innovation and growth and survival to the Galactic Council. We say this: you have built something remarkable over 10,000 years. And we are not trying to destroy it, and we are simply declining to join it, and we hope that one day we can establish friendly relations based on mutual respect rather than attempted subordination to the independent species watching this. We say, you are not alone, and if you choose to stand on your own, we understand that choice, and if you want allies who will not try to control you. We are here, and to everyone else, and Santos's voice grew warm, and we are humanity, and we are curious. Stubborn, occasionally reckless, and deeply committed to the idea that people should be free to choose their own destiny, and if you share those values, we would like to get to know you. If you do not share those values, we respect that too. She smiled one last time. The message ends here, and Santos said, but the conversation is just beginning, and we will be listening. The broadcast ended for exactly 7 seconds. The galaxy was silent, then every communication network in known space exploded with activity in Concordia Station. Grand Ambassador Kelthrick watched the broadcast with his skin cycling through colors so fast they blurred into gray, and beside him, High Chancellor Morgan stood like a darkened crystal statue. They just invited the entire galaxy to bypass us, and Morgan said quietly, yes. And Kelthrick replied, they just offered an alternative to 10,000 years of council authority. Yes, they just made us look like controlling bureaucrats who fear independence. Yes, Morgan turned to look at Kelthrick. And did any of your diplomatic training prepare you for this? No, and Kelthrick admitted, and in all my years, across all my contacts, I have never seen anything like this, and they are not fighting us, and they are not trying to destroy us. And they are simply existing in parallel and offering others the same option. How do we respond to that? Kelthrick's skin slowly settled into a calm blue and the color of acceptance, I think, and he said carefully, and we do exactly what Santos suggested, and we establish friendly relations based on mutual respect. And we stop trying to force humanity into our framework, and we accept that they have chosen a different path. The Council will never agree to that. Some will, and Kelthrick said, and the younger species. The ones who remember what it was like before they joined, and the ones who sometimes wonder if they made the right choice. And in Chancellor.
Us.
This is going to split the Council, I know, and Morgan said heavily, and I have been Chancellor for 900 years, and I never thought I would see the day when Council authority was genuinely challenged. Perhaps it was inevitable, and Kelthrick said quietly, and perhaps 10,000 years is long enough for any system to go unchallenged, and perhaps humanity is doing us a favor by forcing us to examine our assumptions. That is a very charitable interpretation, or perhaps just an honest one in the Sistory Collective's embassy. Counselor Alira watched the same broadcast with her mandibles clicking in what might have been joy or terror, or both. They did it, and she said to no one in particular, and actually did it her aid. A younger sister named Kryn looked at her nervously and did what? Counselor, they made independence seem attractive, and Alira replied, and they made it seem possible. And do you know how many species have dreamed of this, but never dared to act? Because they thought they would be alone. How many more than the Council wants to admit? And Alira said, and now humanity has shown them they do not have to be alone. Is this good for the Sistory Collective? Alira considered the question carefully, and I do not know yet, but I think it is good for the galaxy, and competition breeds innovation, and alternative perspectives prevent stagnation. And maybe this is exactly what we needed. Even if it weakens the Council. especially if it weakens the council, and Elira said, and because power, that is, never challenged becomes corrupt, and authority that is never questioned becomes tyranny, and humanity is providing a check on our power. The Chancellor will not see it that way, no, and Elira agreed, but some of us will across the galaxy. Reactions varied wildly.